All right, folks. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. I have 11 o'clock on the East Coast. I'm Tony Sargis with the U.S. Department of Commerce, U.S. Commercial Service, based out of Middletown, Connecticut. Just one note before we begin the kind of formal presentation. This webinar is being recorded. If you object, please disconnect at this time. Welcome back to our manufacturing month. So we've done this in previous years. October is manufacturing month, so we're kicking it off today with our Trade Talk Tuesday Export Compliance Series. Today is Tuesday, October 4th, 2022, and we will be doing these sessions throughout the month of October. Today, we're going to start with our Export Compliance Management Program. These sessions will be about 20 minutes long, and then we'll do about 10 minutes of Q&A. So the idea here is to get everyone, get some good information, quality information. We'll provide some resource materials as well in follow-up, but hopefully out the door by 11:30 at the latest. Our second topic will be Know Your Customers, Red Flags, and User Statements, followed by Screening Best Practices. And then our last session will be Ask the Compliance Expert, which Alfredo and Jose will make their time available for. Just, we'll have some standard questions set up, but we'll also allow you to come in with any questions that you may have. So as we go through the month of October, think of those questions. You can feel free to put them in the chat as well, but if you have burning questions on Tuesday, October 25th, please bring those in advance. Moving forward, today's speakers, again, I'm Tony Sargis with the U.S. Commercial Service in Connecticut, and we have our expert speakers, Jose Abrantes, Senior Manager for Global Trade Compliance at OFS. He is also the chairman of our District Export Council, and Alfredo Fernandez, partner with Shipman & Goodwin. If you've done trainings with us over the past many years, 10 years or so, you've probably seen them multiple times. They have great expertise, and we welcome them back today for our trade compliance series. Q&A, just briefly in the bottom right-hand portion of your screen, you will see a Q&A feature. Please feel free to feed those questions into the chat, and we'll be taking a look at them as we're presenting, and then we'll try to address at least a handful of them towards the end of the presentation. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jose and Alfredo, and we're going to begin our Trade Talk series. Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you. We have done this training in the past, and so the actual presentation that we've done is recorded and is available for anyone to view. BIS also does a wonderful job. They have a nice little video about this export, developing a corporate export management and compliance program. They could probably find on YouTube, but it's also on the BIS website. And the BIS website does have several tools about going into detail on all of these. So we only had 20 minutes, and I figured, well, how can we make it so rather than go through slide by slide, we're just going to have the steps there, and we can hopefully make it a little more interactive, where we can have some input and some questions on what you should do, and in my case, what I've done in each of the individual steps. So I have come to you with over 25 years of experience in export compliance. So I have got the opportunity to have done this, go through this at least 3 times, from the zero to the full completion on 3 different companies over my career. So the first one thing that you would need to look, and this is not just a, it's nice to say, is management commitment, right? If you need to develop a trade compliance policy or export compliance policy, and that policy should be signed by the CEO, and it should be reviewed at least annually, even though in my case currently, I have reviewed annually, but I've until recently I have not updated it, only every other year, just because there was really no changes to it, or I was waiting for some changes in the company. BIS does recommend you to have it annually. This year, with adding Russia, Belarus, and the Ukraine occupied territories, that was definitely time for me to update my policy. So I have a new CEO in my company, and so we want to make sure that we have a whole new fresh start. Once you have that policy in place, you got to make sure you disseminate it to where all can see. It doesn't matter if you have a wonderful policy, if they can find it or if they can have it. So I try to make sure that people in the shipping area, customer service, have it on the back of their walls if necessary, but also that they know where the documents are on our internal website. Alfredo, any input on this?
From a legal perspective and by way of background, I've a lawyer at a law firm specializing in export compliance, and I've been with the firm 10 years. I lead our manufacturing practice team, and before that, I was an aerospace engineer in the industry. When we're assisting clients with this and have dealt with some enforcement issues, which is a little scarier topic, but it usually comes back to what is your export compliance program, and show me your CEO's letter and show me how your executive leadership has been involved and supported this and capitalized it appropriately. So on that first row, the enforcement agents and in plenty of instances that management commitment, both visually with something in writing and then in practice, is actually a very important and often asked about issue.
Yeah, one of the things when I do training, and one of my first slides on my internal training is the policy. And I always say to the people in the shipping and customer service is like, this is there to protect you as well. If someone asks you to ship something or to do something that you know you shouldn't be doing, you hold on to this policy and say, no, I'm not going to do it. So it empowers those individuals within your company that are trying to follow the rules and have the awareness to kind of keep you straight. So on the second one of the EMCP is risk assessment. And this is important because we're probably talking to right now with a very different group of industries and companies. My first company that I worked for was a nuclear radiation detection equipment. And all our customers were in China, Russia, India, Pakistan. They're all the bad guys, or potentially bad guys for nuclear radiation issues at that time. And that was a great way to learn. But the risk assessment for me was very easy. Well, I knew my product was nuclear radiation detection equipment. I knew exactly who my customers were. There was even lists to tell me which ones were IEA certified or not. So I knew my application and I knew what my markets were, right? So depending on what product you are selling, the risk is greater. And depending what markets are you selling, the risk is also increases. So you have to understand a little bit of balance what your products are, what are the risks based on your markets, your customers, and your applications.
Yeah, and I'll just add that the risk assessment component of a management program for this is kind of the heart of the program. What you're building around is your risk specific to your company, and those risks change over time. We've had a lot of clients who've had a very dynamic year with the Russia-Ukraine situation in terms of what does my risk assessment look like now in 2022? Because it's different than it was a couple of years ago, and in some cases significantly. So that risk assessment has evolved. So the rest of the export management compliance program has evolved, and that also applies to tangential topics like anti-corruption and anti-bribery issues as well, knowing markets and where your products are going, how they could be used, how they're transported to the rest of the world. Is an important part of what you're actually building to manage risk with the compliance program.
So now you have of understanding of where you're going, what you are offering, and where you're going. You need to figure out what are the rules that apply to it, right? And that comes with export authorization. So the first thing you got to do is go through a jurisdiction, commodity jurisdiction, and this is the process where you determine which agency in the U.S. controls your products, whether your product is ITAR and falls under the Department of State, or is EAR and falls under the Department of Commerce. So commodity jurisdiction, you can formally go to the government and file for one, or you can do it yourself if it's obvious to you. The second step, if it's in the commerce, is then you go for a classification where you obtain the ECCN of your product. And that comes a lot of the rules with that, where you can sell, where you need a license. Then after that, you have customer screening and a license determination based on your product ECCN. So that's the process that you have to go to. Can I export my product to this country? Yes or no? Or if I can, do I need an export license? Yes or no? Anything on that, Alfredo?
No, that was great.
All right.
Yeah, let's keep going.
The other one is record keeping. So the rule is really 5 years you are required to keep your records. One thing I would like to point is it's 5 years from the last transaction. So you have exported a product today, and then 5 months from now you are re-exporting the product to another country, or it comes back for repair and you send it out again. So the resets the clock to 5 years. Or you use that export for the duty drawback program. Now you are extending your duty drawback for 5 years from the time you file that duty drawback claim. So 5 years from the last transaction, and that kind of changes a little bit. So don't just immediately delete all the records after 5 years. The other one that I tend to is be aware where the records are kept in your company. Are electronic versus record keeping versus hard copy? Are they centralized or are in the different departments? And above all, how fast can you produce the records in case of an audit?
And in terms of how this looks in a compliance program, it would be specific to your company, how you maintain records, what kind of records you create, bills of lading, airway bills, sales, POs, all that stuff. It would be its own chapter in a broader compliance plan, so that when someone needs to understand what do I have to keep and for how long, there's a space in the program. They know chapter 5 or whatever it is, where they go, they check it out, they understand it, and make sure things are set up for later. Where this comes into play too, from an enforcement perspective, is an enforcement agent, if there's a transaction in question and we're assisting a client with this, so it's top of mind for me, they'll ask for records, and if you can't show the records, you're opening yourself up to some noncompliance or violation and penalties. Even if you're not the target of the investigation, sometimes BIS or the Department of State will be more interested in a downstream transaction, but they have to understand how it went from your facility in the United States and probably bounced around a few times in foreign lands and ended up where it did, right? So even if you're a fact provider for the government, you need to have all your ducks in a row too, because if you don't have the records to show it, you can't help yourself, and you're opening up yourself to potential non-compliances.
I always say record keeping is what proves your compliance, right? So there's the evidence to the government that you comply. And that the next part of that is training. So one of the things that we're told is provide job-specific training. Don't just necessarily train everybody on everything, because it's going to go one ear out the other. So for instance, a shipping department, they should know about like AES filing. They should know about requirements on a commercial invoice. They should know about countries that they shouldn't be doing business with. While someone in sales probably also should have Foreign Corruption Practice Act, anti-bribery, or should have different kinds of skills that you try to cater the training to them. So typically I have job-specific training. I have management training, which is also important. You want to make sure that the management understands what we're being asked and what the requirements are. And then some lighter general awareness training throughout the company. All this training could be a formal sit-down training, posters, newsletters, handbooks, a variety of different things that you can be creative how to reach your audience.
Yep. And we recommend training logs or training records to be able to bolster the compliance program, and in case you need to show that your people are receiving training. Maybe annual isn't the right periodic refresher, but refresher trainings are kind of expected because people tend to forget after it's been a while, and they don't necessarily need the full course every year, but a little quick hitter refresher type of training with some documentation that those kind of updates were provided can be helpful, again, when you're trying to prove your innocence or prove your compliance in one of those situations.
So the best way for that, in the segue to the next, is auditing, monitoring, and assessing. So set up. Oh, I think I have. Do I have? Yeah, schedule regular internal audits to test your compliance. So don't be afraid of what you find. Spot check often, even between audits, to make sure that some things that you found before have been corrected. Look for best practices throughout, even within different sites. I do this, and then look for opportunities to improve your program. So internal audits are a great way for you to catch something. For me, often leads to retraining, to reinforce points here and there that I think people are kind of underlooking or not grasping completely. So auditing, monitoring, assessing, and kind of reviewing and revising your program on a regular basis.
Yep. And when you have a resource like Jose at your company, a lot of that is done internally appropriately. But for some of our smaller exporting clients, they just don't have the personnel to run an audit or do an internal assessment with confidence. And occasionally that's the call we get on our end to assist and guide a company through that through an external source.
But now, in Alfredo, even for a bigger company, sometimes I've been asked, well, you're just auditing yourself. Of course,
Right.
everything is going to be perfect. So you either are very critical to make sure that you revealing the flaws in your own program that I created and developed, right? So it's always great to have a different set of eyes to come in and say, okay, this is what you're doing, this is where you can improve. I think, and it also comes into the first one, that management commitment. When you have an outside supporter, outside company that comes in and say, you need to be more of these type of things, then it's not just you, the compliance person, yelling and screaming. You have some empowerment to push.
Yep. Yeah, it's comparable to financial audits and other types of compliance issues.
Yeah. And the next one is normally people call Alfredo, export violations and corrective actions. So the first thing that you do, and you do this when you write a manual, is set up proper escalation guidelines so that individuals in your company know how to report issues, right? If you find this, if you find something, tell. Who you going to tell? Tell the compliance, tell to the site manager. If you have a site advocate, set up some kind of a structure so the communication flows to trade compliance. And then we'll review whether it is a violation or not. Could be a violation of our internal procedures, but not necessarily an export violation. So we need to make sure that is a violation and that we can prove it. And then export violations should be reported to BIS with respective corrective actions you took so the violation will not happen again. So it doesn't work for you to just tell BIS that that you committed a violation. You need to tell at the time what are you doing to fix it. There are a lot of mitigation factors for self-reporting, which you definitely taking advantage depending on the seriousness of violation.
Yep. And in many cases where there was no bad faith, it was just an oversight, or somebody wasn't trained well enough for a particular business task, or was fuzzy on what was allowed, what wasn't allowed. Self-disclosure could be the recommended course of action. We've had situations where self-disclosure isn't the right course of action. And if there's no affirmative need to disclose it, you don't legally have to. But for the most part, I'd say the default would be this is appropriate to disclose because that self-disclosure gets you some, the formal word is brownie points with the government that you've brought it forward, you've approached it with good faith, and you've put in some corrective actions and some longer term corrections with the process, and with the people, so that you don't see it again. That runs the risk too of if the same thing happens again in a year, the government won't look so kindly on it because the trust in your corrective action has diminished a bit, and occasionally we see some larger enforcement penalties when the same thing keeps happening over and over again, over the course of several years. So always, there's pros and cons to everything, and mostly in this case, violations that were just whoopsie type mistakes can go in for a favorable result. And the letter would say something like, we agree this was a violation. We're not going to issue a penalty, but keep improving your program and process.
Yeah, I believe that about 98 to 99%, according to BIS, of all voluntary disclosures result in just a warning letter, or
Good
nothing
odds.
at all. So it's not a bad thing, and you do get those brownie points. The last one is really build and maintain an export compliance manual. Goes without saying, with all the things that we already put in, first thing should be your management, your trade compliance policy, but create an export compliance manual that says what you do, and you must do what you say, right? There's no point of paying Alfredo for a very expensive, very pretty manual if people in your company don't know how to use it, don't know where it is, and if it doesn't reflect your day-to-day practices, right? And I'm not saying that he doesn't do great manuals. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that if you have a manual, it shouldn't be just a regurgitation of the rules, but it also, even in flow charts, should map out your process of how to follow each of the regulations, each of the processes that you have to follow.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm that expensive. Just saying.
I didn't say this. I didn't say expensive. I said fancy. Did I say expensive?
Yeah. Oh, very.
I thought I meant extensive.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
No, I did mean extensive.
Right,
not expensive.
Having something very pragmatic and practical instead of a 2-inch binder of stuff that's all good material. Having something like including a code of ethics, or some checklists and things like that, where people can pin it on their cubicle if they're in that setting, or tape it on the wall or corkboard or whatever, where they know, I can read this in less than 10 minutes, or maybe even less. I can read this in 5 minutes and get the highest priority points and refreshers every couple of months or whatever when I see it on my desk, as well. Just keep it user friendly, and then it will be used by different people in different ways. Shipping and engineering and sales are going to do things differently, but it is an important part of just having something on paper.
And revise it often. Don't let the dust settle in that manual. You're gonna make sure that you look it up and revise it. At least look at it once a year to make sure they're still fresh up. And that's it. Those are the key elements of developing your corporate export management and compliance program. There's a lot to each individual steps, for sure. But at this point in time, we're just open for questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Jose. Thank you, Alfredo. So a couple things that we put in the chat just to start, and then we'll look at these. We have a couple questions in the Q&A. So first, Alfredo shared a link from the BIS export compliance guidelines. So we put that in the chat, and I'll follow up with obviously a separate email with those details, as well as in 2020. I don't think much of it's too dated. We did a presentation with Jose on developing a corporate export management program. I believe it's about an hour and a half long, so it goes through these steps in detail. That link is posted in the chat as well, so you'll have access to that. And then, let's go to these questions. So, Jose, first question is, how soon should a new export company establish an export management compliance program?
Well, I think it goes back to your risk assessment right away.
Mm-hmm.
Right. At this point in time, if you're a new company and your target is Russia, then you need to be assessing that right away. I think you need to look at your product, your risk, and start saying, okay, we have an issue here. if you have potential issue, then you need to step back and understanding all the steps before you start exporting. Right? Make sure you don't do any violation.
Agreed. And the government will be calibrating their view of the company based on size, resources, market, risk to national security, et cetera. So if you're, kind of new to the game, getting your exporting legs under you, and dealing with some not super high priority countries with a not super high sensitivity product, you'll probably get some decent leash as to how much time you have to get something up and running. And frankly, a lot of companies just don't have anything formalized yet that have been doing this for years, or decades. They have kind of the tribal knowledge of what to do and what to not do. But when you ask them, where's your program or your manual, they don't have it. So that's my piece there.
Thank you, Alfredo. I'm going to go through this record keeping question, and then Alfredo and Jose, if you want to take a look, there's a longer question that came in if you want to take a crack at that after this record keeping question. So in regards to record keeping, any suggestion on where and how records should be kept? And then there was another question on record keeping. Does the company need pre-authorization to start keeping export records electronically? So two record keeping questions in one there.
Yeah, the electronic record keeping requirement is authorization is for customs purposes only. It does not have to do with the export part of it. So you are allowed to do electronic record keeping without previous authorization from the government on the export side. How to go about and do that? Again, you need to make a list of all the documents that you need from a PO, customer PO, sales order, end user statement, any types of communications, export license, and then you develop a matrix. You could either demand a central location for all documents, or you can do a matrix that say, okay, all my POs are going to be kept electronically here, or my export license are going to be kept in this area. So you can kind of try to do a map out either way. There's no right way or wrong way to do it, as long as you can retrieve the records, say within 48 hours, and you can produce those to government.
Thank you, Jose. Anything on that, Alfredo?
Yep. And it can change depending on how your business is currently set up. In a multi-facility business or across, different states or different countries, we found that a lot of clients just prefer an electronic cloud-based database where things can be organized by transactions. And then, like the export compliance manager will also essentially duplicate some of the records for a license and authorizations folder. So he or she could always, grab those specifically or whatever. So there can be some dupes out there in terms of who needs what types of records, but it should be pretty evident to somebody who gets asked to provide records where to go, and do so in a decently efficient way. And with a lot of serial number tracking and things like that, some of our clients surprise me with what they can dig out from something that happened 7 years ago, just based on the serial number, and just pull up, an electronic file with the invoice and signatures and whatever. So there are, some good ways that clients are finding how to do this.
Thank you, Alfredo. We'll go to the question. You want to take a crack at this, Jose, regarding the examples of each business unit and how it can make a export compliance program more successful?
I
don't know
haven't
if you see
seen
that
that
question.
I've seen one that I want to address real quick from Sarah. Said, what percentage of violations did you say end up in just a warning letter? So I didn't say violations, voluntary disclosures. So when you disclose a violation to the government, 98 to 99% of those result in a warning letter. If violations without, we don't have number on that. But voluntary disclosures, the BIS reports about 98 to 99 violations that were reported that they issue only a warning letter. And what's the other one, Tony? I don't see it.
Me neither.
All right, I'll read this to you guys. Are there good examples of what each business area can do to make the export compliance program more successful? could you share some examples of the process gaps that could expose a company and cause violation that are good to share during training with each department, such as shipping, customer service, sales, accounting, etc. So I think a lot of training probably, but we'll toss it over to you guys for some input.
So just one thing, the BIS publishes this this book every year, Don't Let This Happen to You, which has a list of all the major violations and cases that they resolved over the last year with fines and penalties. That's always great to scare people off a little bit, especially when people end up in jail or fines of $200 million. I also have my own library of issues that we come in, customers that look suspicious, you know, that jewelry store in New Jersey that was trying to get optical fiber for a friend in Saudi Arabia. I keep all of those as a depository of cases of this has happened to us. It's not just BIS telling these stories. So I use real life studies and cases that happened to our company, and I put them in the training to kind of first gets a lot more exciting, but also for them to see that this is real to their day-to-day.
Yep. And I think one of the elements of that question was what can the departments add to the group? So, you know, examples of when they catch something fishy like that, particularly in a sales or a client or a customer facing role too, but also in the preparation, I've found the preparation of the training, doing a little bit of an informational interview with different departments to understand the pain points, or, you know, where their people would be confused with training, to, you know, adapt the training to something that really speaks to them and to their day-to-day job. And they, you know, when someone's part of the solution, you know, they feel like they can buy in even more. So that's been successful at times.
All right, Jose Alfredo, thank you so much. So I did end up putting those links in the chat. Again, I think a few folks didn't see them. So we have the YouTube video on export compliance management program that was done in 2020, the BIS guidelines, the compliance guidelines that Alfredo shared. I also put in, I think this is a little bit dated now, but I think it's still a good film, the FBI film Made in America, as maybe a good training aid and something to view. That was fairly well done. I think it's a few years old. And then the final link you'll see in the chat, and we'll get these out via email as well, was just the Export Week Manufacturing Month activities. So that's going to do it for today. We will be in touch next week again on Tuesday for our Trade Talk Tuesday series at 11 o'clock on the East Coast. But everyone, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.